Hello and welcome to Burgundy Unpicked, the Corny and Barrow podcast, where we're delving into the Burgundy campaign on Prieur with the Unpicked sessions. And we thought we've had a little break. I've come back from 2 week trip to Asia, which was wonderful, but thrilled to be back here. Devastated in the meantime since learning you chaps didn't do a pod when I was away. I thought you'd just crack on and put the knife in.
We thought that taking over from you as podcast host would sort of really upset you. Yeah, you're just too good.
Yeah, okay. Might be to do with a busy schedule, perhaps, of offers. We'll see. But in the meantime, we thought we'd sort of come back with a bit of a bang, and we're going to do a bit of a double header here. We've got two offers that are out at the moment, and very relevant, and with our schedule and what customers can look at buying, and that's Domaine Jacques Prieur and their 2023 release, and the Château de la Tour 2023 release as well. So we're here to discuss those two domains, give a little bit more colour, bit of opinion, maybe some context. I know some people have been buying, Jacques Prieur. Our first vintage was 2013, so some of you will be very familiar with the wines already. But with our ever-growing newer customer base, which we welcome with open arms, this could be something quite new still at the moment. So I think if we start with Jacques Prieur, I mean, as I'm chatting, I'll kick things off. I think it's always good to. I actually did a really good dinner, hosted a dinner where we're fortunate enough to be the agents for Domaine Jacques Prieur and in Hong Kong as well as London and the UK exclusively. And so I hosted a sort of dinner masterclass out there in Hong Kong, and it was really good fun. So I'll talk about a couple of the wines later in a moment. But one of the things I thought was a good way to start, which we can maybe bring here, was just a bit of the history of the domain, because it's one of those domains that has a very well-known name than Jacques Prieur, and the Prieur family is still involved in it, but not in the sort of the managing way, and they don't have the sort of the majority ownership of the estate. So we could sort of start there. I mean, it goes back to 1868 when there's a Claude Duverger and Marie Tabarot they hooked up together and they ultimately bought a house in Meursault, and that was in 1879. They then started acquiring vineyards, and some of the well-known plots that we know, Montrachet, Combet, across 89 and 90. I guess the inception of the domain is Domaine Jacques. So Jacques Prieur was born in 1893. Thank you. Yeah, 1893. Jacques Prieur is the great nephew for Claude and Marie. Marie's niece, Hélène, married Henri Prieur from Beaune, and that's how the Prieur family arrived on the scene. Then, unfortunately, the Duverger side, Claude, passed away, and that was in 1920. And he left the estate to Jacques, who must have been showing some interest and aptitude towards the Vigneron side. And when his mother passed away in 1956, they renamed the estate to Domaine Jacques Prieur. And then Jacques himself passed away in 1965 and was left to children. So this sort of brought in the Labrière side of the ownership now, because I think the children clearly didn't want to continue with the estate as ownership, and there was an opportunity to buy the controlling stake, and that it happened in 1988 with the Labrière family coming in. So with the Labrière family, they appointed Nadine Gobelin, the winemaker, in 1990, who's still currently the winemaker today. Very well respected, highly regarded, the first female winemaker to win the winemaker of the year for the Revue de Vin de France, a brilliant publication. And Edouard Labrière, who currently runs and steers the sort of the family Labrière empire, if you like, and decision making at Domaine Jacques Prieur. He came along in 2008, and I think we'll touch on Edouard a little bit more, because I think his personality is a huge draw to what's happening at the domain, but also the foresight and the direction in which the domain is going, and that's probably to his background. We know he was a diplomat for a long time, and then he became a courtier in Bordeaux. So I think he's got great market knowledge, and he understands that where pricing kind of needs to be within Burgundy, and we have a lot of open and honest conversations with him about that. So yeah, that's the sort of the history of the Domaine Jacques Prieur. I also realised, Aaron kindly pointed out during that sort of monologue that I forgot to sort of welcome everyone else who's in the room. So apologies. We're joined today by Aaron.
Hello, Joe.
He's livid he didn't get to speak sooner than 5 minutes into the pod. Guy, hello. Hi, Joe. Good to be here. And Nev.
Good to be finally welcomed.
Yeah, I have my manners. Sorry, I must have left them in Hong Kong. So
sorry about the paper.
No, not at all. Yeah, no, all good. So Jacques Prieur. So that's the sort of the background of the estate, and this is where we're at. And I think what's very important to look at with this 23 offer, which I think we'll start with Guy and his impressions of the visit. Yourself, Adam, Bryce, and I were part of the team that went to visit Edouard and Nadim, which was a wonderful tasting. It's a long one because it's involves, and then we'll maybe talk about the things that are going on now to sort of fine tune and to add detail and precision to the wines, which I think are taking them to this newer, more exciting, elevated level.
Thanks, Joe. Well, it was a great tasting. We tasted in the existing cellar, which is an underground tasting room adjacent to the main barrel cellar. The Domaine has opened in the last 12 months a new cellarage tasting and entertaining space, which is all part of a new extension, which is very impressive and essentially has been added to the back of the Shay. And provides wonderful new facilities. So I was sort of slightly hoping that we would taste in their new tasting space, but we ended up being in the previous one, which is absolutely fine and is it is very functional and worked well. It was me, Joe, Adam, and Bryce from Team TMB, and we tasted with both Edouard and Nadine. There's a whole range of different sort of tasting experiences, as listeners to this of this podcast will remember, and some of them can be slightly more chaotic or haphazard, and you may end up balancing on a barrel and sort of writing tasting notes in a very dark cellar. Domaine Jacques Prieur is the opposite of all that. It's very well organized. The information is all to hand. Nadine has a big lever arch file beside her, and if you have any questions about new oak or percentage of whole bunches or picking dates, all of that information is readily to hand, which for me in particular, who is sort of charged with writing down some notes about the wines, I find that invaluable, and it can be a very sort of rewarding experience tasting that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just adds some great color to the conversation as well, particularly because with these wines, and on the whole, the reds are sort of generally destemmed, aren't they? And go sort of through prolonged maceration. And with that, I feel the whole bunch character is quite, some years they are introducing it into some cuvées, and it sort of keeps us on our toes because, Bresson and Vougeot quite often have a little dabbling. I know this year they don't. And then, but Champimont. So it allows us to sort of help and sort of translate, I guess, the what they're trying to achieve within the vintage for each cuvée as well. So I'm always, like you, I'm welcome of the extra info.
Absolutely. And then one other consideration for tasting from barrel always is that you never, on some occasions, know where the samples have been taken from. So, you could be tasting a new oak barrel, you could be tasting a representative blend which has been made to approximate as closely as possible, or you could be tasting something which is really not going to have that much relationship to the final cuvée. At Jacques Prieur, they are very good about telling you where the samples have come from. So Nadine will say, I took this from a 2-year-old barrel, or I've made a representative blend from this barrel and that barrel. So, it's a small detail, but it goes to show how detail driven they are at the estate. And I think that all goes to their very intensive winemaking practices.
In terms of like signature for Jacques Prieur, do you think, obviously because they've got these amazing holdings from sort of up and down, the Côte d'Or, do you find it's easy to sort of get a real signature for the Domaine? Because obviously you've got these unbelievable holdings in the Côte de Beaune, and then some of the absolute greats from the Côte de Nuits as well. And I think most producers that we deal with are sort of blessed with one or the other. So you have to have both as a rare beast. But just do you want to speak to just sort of style and what they like?
It's a really good point, Nev. And I think the fact that Domaine Jacques Prieur has such a plethora of these great names, any one of them in isolation could well be the jewel of any other estate. But the fact that they have this amazing roster of Grand Crus and Premier Crus, it does mean that, we're almost spoiled for choice, and it can be hard to see the wood for the trees in some cases. I think in terms of stylistic signature, I would say that there's a real aromatic prettiness to these wines. As Joe said, they are not very high on the whole bunch spectrum, but there is a sort of perfume and an exotic expression of the fruits, which I think is quite typical in the reds of the Jacques Prieur style. The whites, I would say, have undergone a bit of a revolution over the last decade. There was a time in the past where they were known as being slightly later picked and maybe slightly fuller, and to give more of a sort of fullness to the fruit expression. That's really changed, and I would say they're really picking on acidity now, and there is a crunchiness and a precision to the whites, which, if you haven't tasted them for a decade, for example, I think would be quite surprising. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's probably a good time to just talk about the domain, the direction it's heading in, etc., as well as where it was at, because I think there's a perception, and this is through my own experience as well. And some mature Jacques Prieur wines are beautiful, and touching on again what Nev said, the holdings are pretty spectacular, and the envy of most domains. It's almost an upside down triangle, because you've got 2 village wines here, 13, 14 Premier Crus, depending on replanting sort of scenarios, and then 9 Grand Crus at the top. So it is phenomenal. And they've also got a real spread of soil types across that, because they've got some holdings which have got some more clay deposits within their Pinots, others that are really sort of drilled into sort of quite higher sort of altitude limestones on some of their plots further up the slopes and things. So there's a lot of material they can play with to try and interpret. So I think previously, for me, you had these sort of bigger styles of Jacques Prieur, probably higher extraction on the reds used to be a thing. They definitely now is more piage only, as we know. There's no punching down. It's sort of trying to sort of coax the fruit, the phenolics through skins over stems and pips. It's trying to get that sort of I guess more beautiful fruit profile, whilst very much giving a canvas to the mineral expression as well. And so I think Edouard's mission, along with Nadine, now feels like they really are sort of a bit more of a terroir warrior style, and they want to show that on the reds particularly.
I think that's like quite a handy sort of mini guide as well, to sort of working your way through the wines, because I think as I was sort of saying, is that there is definitely some sort of overarching stylistic things that you can draw a thread from the from throughout the DJP wines. But I think one of the things that I try and do with customers is actually sort of have a think about sort of what sort of wines that they like. If you like those kind of more denser clay-based wines, there's a nice little cluster of wines, from the range that you could get there. You could do a bit of Volnay Champagne, you could do a bit of the Corton Grand Cru. If you like those kind of slightly broader, more sort of muscular styles. But if if the sort of leaner, more like limestone-driven wines is something that you're interested in, obviously Chevalier, if you're lucky to get a case of that, Chevalier and Montrachet there, or Merceau Perrier, but also some of the wines in Gevrey as well have that sort of real limestone presence. And so I think that's kind of a nice little mini guide to sort of maybe how people should think about them.
Yeah,
as does Musigny, for example, and Chambertin.
Yeah, because I think and going on to the whites, which you touched on. I mean, so for example, Edouard, one of the things that he sort of just said straight away when he came in after a year was like, we don't want any. Let's remove batonnage from the entirety of the white wine making process. They press straight away now, as soon as as with him picking very quickly with pneumatic press, and it's strained to steel. They want to bring in sort of more tension within the wines, but they still do play a bit with picking, because I know Chevalier Montrachet a little bit slightly later picked than some of their neighbours, etc. So but with acid profile in mind, and I think that plays into again styles. You've got sort of more richer, robust styles versus more focused, precise, and you can talk to any of the guys here at us to sort of get a steer on that. And for me, when I did the most recent dinner in Hong Kong there, which we've only been agents, this is our second year we're only agents there for. So we did a dinner, and there was a big amount of surprise about the whites in the room, because they're probably a little bit more known for as a red Domaine. And one of the questions were off the back of tasting, hang on, is this a white or a red Domaine? What are they trying to go for? Obviously, this is one of the few that managed to straddle that sort of beam of quality quite evenly on both sides, and which is a real talent for Nadine to be able to do. They do, on that note, they have totally separate cellars at the Domaine. For a red wine cellar, a white wine cellar, this is for production for élevage, using their own individual Massol selection yeast for both sides. So they do, and always have for a long time now, had that focus. And I think for me, the important message for Jacques Prieur is, Edouard's coming up to almost 20 years of being at the Domaine. And for me, it's like anything. If you're going into any sort of business, there's a period of settling in, understanding, the honeymoon of the excitement, then looking at where they can make the changes, then making the changes, seeing the results from those changes, and then getting into a sort of an almost slipstream of, when those ideologies are put into practice, where the fruition of those practical changes come into play. And I think that's where we're at now with Domaine Jacques Prieur as well. There's a real step up in quality. And I think the whites, you've seen a big change, and that's what was echoed at the dinner was, oh, wow, okay, so these are fresher than I was expecting in terms of vibrancy and acid structure, and with a real clear definition of where they're from as well. So it's kudos. And I think, Nev and I, we visited in October last year, and we had some first-hand experience of what they're trying to do differently, or not do differently, but certainly fine-tune.
Some serious precision on show. I think we talk a lot about kind of Burgundy Domaines and that this sort of detailed, orientated approach, and it sort of sometimes can be a little bit tricky to sort of see what we're on about.
Mm-hmm.
But really clear one is that Edouard and Nadine they're splitting up most of their cuvées and doing barrel testing, as in with different barrel makers, coopers, with 3 different examples, because they want to know which style of barrels go best with each particular climat vineyard. That is you taste a lot around Burgundy. There's not that many people doing that. I'm also conscious Mr. Eccles has not put his oar into the DJP chat yet, and I want to know what your approach is. How do you kind of navigate the DJP glorious offer? What's your strategy for it?
Just thinking then that I was about to do the classic in a meeting, unmute, nothing from me. See you next week. No, I've been particularly really excited by the whites recently. I think just listening to you guys sort of really define how that stylistic change has happened in the whites is quite useful. For me, you have that lovely fine line of acidity, and then throughout the cuvées and the whites, they sort of build on richness. You have sort of the Champimont, which is sort of lovely, open, nice ripeness, juicy acidity, and then you really move up into Le Combat, which is such a great value Le Combat for sort of the site that is right next to what should be a Grand Cru Merceau. It is one of the great wines of the Domaine, and then to top it all off, you get to taste sort of Montrachet, which has such great richness to it, and never forgets that sort of real acid drive that the whites are now showing. On the red side, I've been completely fooled twice in the past 6 months.
It's not like you.
With the thanks very much, Joe. Good to have you back. With the Musigny and the Chambertin, which have just I've placed them in. I've placed the wines blind in the hands of the sort of domains that I would never usually have expected, because of that sort of real change towards sort of perfume, those cold, those pre-fermentation macerations at cooler temperatures, just really meaning that you get this sort of really nice, elegant perfume fruit.
Yeah, well, I know a few of us on a couple of occasions, myself, luckily, including in Hong Kong recently, but we've had the Musigny 17 from Jacques Prieur, and it's a real beauty. There's a real concentration of fruit captured, but again, there's a little bit of a sour which you're referring to on the perfume, which from a destemmed wine is not the easiest to achieve at times. Okay, the vintage character might allow that sort of more aromatic presence to come into play slightly earlier in bottle age, but it's got this real finesse there now as well, which I think, with Musini, you can go down sort of two avenues, kind of. You can try and go for the sort of the raw power that can be delivered through that sort of limestone rich terre blanche and terre rouge combination, or you can go for the sort of the more sort of Chambol side of, we want elegance, finesse, perfume, and I think the Jacques Prieur style actually combines the two quite nicely. Would you agree?
Yeah, completely. That's that really nice signature that runs through sort of freshness with the it's that destemmed fruit that we're talking about. It gives it a nice sort of elegance and a coolness to the fruit without ever being sort of overly.
It's slightly tender as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tender,
Yeah.
supple without being sort of overly spicy.
Yeah, I mean, so for you guys then, to round out the DJP sort of segment, if you had sort of quick fire, removing kind of allocation or like how short supply, kind of some of the Grand Crus and top stuff is, forget all that for a minute. What's everybody's wine of 23?
Good question. So I'm going to answer this. Sorry, it's very typical Muller here. I'm going to answer this in two flips of a coin. One side is what I think people should be buying from this offer almost every year, because there's a couple of wines that I'd love to highlight. So Clos de Mazaret Blanc, for that sort of wonderful precision, that wonderful sort of focused style of white Burgundy. If that's what you want, mineral verve, that is one of their original purchases, and it's a monopole of the Domaine, is a must for me. Then to sort of counterbalance and to show something with a bit more richness, and again, typicity of the vineyard, is Combet, Pliny Combet. I love that vineyard. Unhelpfully, it's my favorite from Domaine Leflevre's range, for example, but it's annoyingly the smallest holdings they have. But you get sort of power driven in there, textural benefits from Combet. On the red, you've then got Beaune Premier Cru Clos de la Figuine, which has got that clay component, which we touched on earlier, which allows this real generosity of fruit to come in early doors. And so Mazaret Blanc and Clos de Figuine Rouge, these are wines that you should be buying and enjoying within sort of 2 to 4 years, 5 years max of buying them and cellaring, because they will impress any guest you have, whether it's looking at starting off a dinner, and which you're going to have some quite big renowned names at, or you've got your friends over for Sunday lunch, and it's going to knock their socks off. Outside of that, it then goes into sort of personal preference. I always think it's worth dabbling with a Vougeot or Bresson every year, and it sort of vies. This year for me, I really sort of turned to their Corton Bresson, because it was quite a voluptuous, richer style of Corton, which you don't normally get, and quite often you can be sort of, I guess, steamroll it into a much more rustic, taut, animal savory style of red Corton at times, and it doesn't have that. So I'd like to sort of say those ones I think you should always consider as a purchase. For me, my favorite, I would probably say, looking at my scores, I was a big fan of their Echezot this year. Again, I think Echezot from various domains can be up and down, depending on the vintage, and I think the trait of the vintage can have a lot of impact on it. For Domaine Jacques Prieur this year, there was an elegance and a sort of sumptuous character, which I think is the fruit aspect, which allowed this to be quite flirtatious as an Echezot, rather than being a bit more serious, which I think in some vintages Jacques Prieur's Echezot can be. So yeah, I'd probably sort of say that. Unfortunately, it's a small amount that we get.
Yeah, well, that's advice to all winemakers out there. Keep your Echezot flirty. Guido.
Yeah, I mean, I was just having a look through my scores from the offer as well, and I mean, Echezot was the wine that I scored the highest. So I mean, I think I'll have to sort of give a shout out to Echezot. I think it's beautiful, and I think it's consistently beautiful at the Domaine. I I put a little sort of aside from our tasting experience in the tasting notes. I sort of tasted it and then smiled to myself, and I think Nadine noticed, and she sort of agreed with me and said, yes, this is a very special place. So yeah, as a sort of outright favorite, I think that. But I mean, as something which is perhaps slightly less well known from Jacques Prieur, I would single out the Coton-Bressons. So I mean, obviously still at Grand Cru level, but I think it is an outstanding expression of Coton, and I think it's something which gives a seductiveness and sort of a full-bodied assertiveness, but also brings out that mineral side of Coton quite beautifully. And then sticking with a white recommendation and sticking with the Hill of Coton in a sense, I absolutely love the Champiment, so the Premier Cru Blanc. And the reason I make a link with Coton or Coton Charlemagne in particular is because it has that sort of chalky minerality to it, which for me always kind of sends me back to the Hill of Coton in my thinking when I taste it. And as an under the radar white pick, I would say that Champiment is almost a mini Coton Charlemagne.
We've all had a lot of fun on that set. There's a 17 Champiment at the moment, which we've got a little bit of stock left, which we put into our Christmas offer. And it's glorious. I had it recently, and for 60 odd a bottle, you are going to struggle to find something with that 17 absolute razor sharp sort of acid profile with textural fruits.
Scintillating vintage.
Yeah, brilliant.
Awesome.
I think for me, I'll make it nice and easy. Combat. I'm gonna Mossy, who has never featured on this podcast. It's quite easy to channel him here and just say, buy Combat, drink Combat, and you will thank me. It was excellent, and for under £100 for a Premier Cru Puligny Montrachet,
Nuts.
On the table is just
of that pedigree as well.
I mean, I had the 19 recently. I showed it at a tasting, and I was having a moment before sort of saying like, right, okay, I've actually picked a really good wine to show you here. You're in for a treat. So,
what about you, Mr. Kirkpatrick?
Well, I thought I'd do the be the man of the people and go with Musini. Yes. I thought the limestone character of the 17 we had recently was pretty glorious.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it is sensational, no doubt. But Clos de Figuine Rouge is, I mean, Mr. Muller's the advocate, but I must say I'm very much in that camp. I think it shows it shows a side to bone that just not many producers can do, really. There's a complexity there, but there is also, there's a real mineral side to bone, which I think people on the red side kind of forget. And I think, Clos de Figuine's an absolute shoe-in for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go. Man of the people. Isn't he for everyone?
Well, yeah, I mean, and a man of the people moment, Neville and I actually, we had quite a beautiful moment in on our recent trip where we opened a bottle of 2014 Montrachet in Domaine Jacques Prieur's holdings of Montrachet. It had been this sort of quite gloomy, overcast, wet morning. We'd gone for this lovely visit, which Nev touched on earlier, where we, again, just to sort of highlight that tasting, I've never done a Cooper tasting of the same wine. And to sort of look at that detail, I think is amazing. And particularly, there's one called Marcel Cadet, a Cooper, and I'm going off topic slightly here, who's selling barrels now at sort of 60% more than Tapin So and Francois Frère, but a lot more older trees and getting a tighter grain. And he served it blind to us and said, look, I'd like to know your opinion on these. And it's definitely parts a certain different character to the wine. But after that sort of visit and lunch, we decided to get a little mini bus up with the guys to the vineyard, pull the glasses out, pop a couple of corks, and the sun gloriously came out to serenade the 14 moment. But that Montrachet, I think their holdings are wonderful. They're towards the Chassagne side of the vineyard. And I think as Montrachet goes, which I've waxed lyrical about, and my personal love for that as a vineyard probably being the best in the world, there are several Domaine holders, several negociants. This is one of the best value, and I know I use that lightly because people will say, hang on, it's £700 a bottle, £800 a bottle, but in terms of what else is out there, it delivers the complexity, this serious terroir expression of one of the greatest vineyards in the world, wrapped up with vintage traits to sort of, season it, almost better than anyone at that price point.
I think it's quite a nice tradition to drink wines in the vineyards where they were made. I think we should do a bit more of that, maybe.
Yeah, we're indeed. Yeah, we had a couple of bottles and had to make hay before we needed to recycle it somewhere. So it was a cracking trip. And so yeah, one where it's left a very, very happy memory for Domaine Jacques Prieur. Anything else you guys want to touch on with DJ P23s?
I think we should maybe move on to another estate.
Yeah, okay. Well, Mr. Eccles, you want to take the lead on this one? Yeah, I think you and Guy, and was it with Adam? You were
Yeah, we were in Ketteringham.
Yeah, so you went and visited Edouard, yeah.
Yeah, 19th of November, day before my birthday. Guido didn't open any Montrachet for me.
You have to go with Joe for that.
Okay, yeah.
Well, you could have had Vougeot.
We could have.
Next time.
So yeah, it was quite a gloomy day, but we met Francois Labbe at Château de la Tour. His son Edouard was away in Hong Kong, I think, at the time.
Actually, with the CMB team, I think, in Hong Kong, wasn't he? So,
yeah. And it was really good to sort of see Francois in full flow. First time that I visited Clos Vougeot, the chateau there. And the same for Adam as well. So he really talked us through sort of everything that they're doing at the Domaine, including really talking about how they moved on the journey of organics in 1992, started experimenting with whole clusters as far back as 1987. So really at the forefront of what Guy now calls peak whole bunch. But they are now moving their sort of rendition of Clos Vougeot to less whole cluster, more juice, more towards an infusion style, and really trying to say that it's the terroir that's speaking, and really focusing on the viticulture, being as precise as possible, so that they have pristine fruit to be able to make a Clos de Vougeot that should have power. And should have some real sort of ageability and concentration, but at the same time having real elegance and sort of acidity running through it. So this year with Clos Vougeot 2023, they made 2 cuvées, Cuvée Classique and then the Vervine. This year there's no homage to Jean Morin, just for the fact that Francois said it just really didn't work this year. So all of that, all the concentrated fruit from one of the plots in Clos Vougeot that would usually go into its own cuvée, this year goes into the Vervine, making it sort of even more concentrated, even more powerful than usual.
For those that don't know, what's the breakdown of kind of what Classique, VV, and Homage is sort of typically about?
Yeah, so the Cuvée Classique is more to showcase how open Clos Vougeot can be while still having power. Francois is really firm at the moment that he wants the wines to be as elegant as possible in the Cuvée Classique, and to do that, he's now using 7 large format barrels that are from Piedmont barrels. So really trying to sort of showcase that time in the barrel really relaxes the wines and gives sort of this power and spice from the from sort of the whole bunches used in there. Then you move up to Clos Vougeot Vervine. This is sort of where it gets sort of really serious, blueberry richness, a little bit of saltiness as well, fine spice going on there. And for me in 2023, that is where you see sort of the power and what whole bunch fermentation can do when you've got these really ripe bunches.
Yeah, and I was going to echo that. I think I was lucky enough. I was in Burgundy in September before we went the month before, and Nev and I did last year that we mentioned already, and popped in and saw Edouard, who I love to bits. I think he's a great guy, and he's his enthusiasm at the Domaine has sort of soared, hasn't it, over the last sort of 5 years, particularly because I think he maybe sort of came in with a feel of, yeah, maybe this is where I want to be, working with the family. But it's clear now that his love for the viticultural side and the winemaking and being in Burgundy is very apparent and cemented. And then, but we did a tasting there, and it was the 23 Vougeots, and we did 3 different barrels. And the first barrel was 100% destemmed from the slightly upper part. There's a very gentle incline. We're not talking Corton levels here. From there, they've got 5.5 hectares within Vougeot, and it was very interesting to see. It was like the fruit was really cherried and sort of had this lovely ripeness, but it felt the finish was a little bit short and clipped, and the grain of the tannins were very different. He then gave us a sample from the Clos Vougeot, which is 45% whole bunch. And here you had this pop of energy that just came through. And it was very, again, sort of a different shape within the mouth. You've got to remember these are barrel samples as well at the time. And then he gave the old vines, the 70-year-old vines, which was about 80% whole cluster. And that was just like the Ariel style of, whole Vendange Entier, that whole cluster, which gives that aromatic, that sort of gorgeous nose and seduction. So those 3 components, and then tasting it for the first time at the in January, our tasting, it was lovely because I look back at these notes and it sort of brought all these different elements back into the whole piece, the sum of the parts into it. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that they've done in the last 2 or 3 years. They've started doing tastings from barrel down in the cellars, and it gives you this overview of sort of understanding of the intricacy of these different plots, because they have 3 different plots. So the 2 main plots are sort of in the center of the Clos, and that includes the original vines that were planted in 1910. And then they have this other plots that you were referring to, Joe, higher up on the slope, getting on towards the border with Echezeaux, and that's a smaller plot, and that tends to go into the Cuvée Classique, whereas the heart of the vineyard, in a sense, is what is really used for the Vieille Vigne Cuvée. But yeah, being able to taste these things from barrel, from the individual plots, I think is fascinating, and you can see the building blocks.
I think for us as well, as you talked about when you were tasting before, it's really nice to see that, like, we set up in the cellar, and then Francois is sort of running around and getting samples from each particular barrel, so that he can try and give you that representation that you talk of, especially when you're tasting the Vieille Vigne, and he's managed to bring together a sample that's 70% whole bunch, which will be representative of how it is when it's bottled. It just really gives you that clear sort of sign of purity. I mean, my notes for that Vieille Vigne are sort of mineral richness, loads of blueberry burn, flecks of black fruit, and loads of saltiness, and then the acidity just comes back in, and it's still that freshness that keeps. So just a really stunning Clos Vougeot Vieille Vigne.
I think what you touched on as well, Guy, with the way they're tasting now, that I think is driven from Edouard as well. I think that's sort of his baby on wanting to do sort of individual parcel tastings, but the Foudre, which you touched on as well, I tasted there and actually had the Meursault. They're doing the Meursault in the Foudre as well. So much sort of, bigger surface area ultimately within these wines. And they are moving forward and trying to, particularly in certain vintages, I guess, counteract what that sort of generosity can do if you're using more traditional élevage of barriques with a wine of that style, when you want to start getting a bit more purity, a little bit more stony mineral presence within the wines as well.
Yeah. I think as time goes on, you also see the personality of the 3 wines, or in this year, 2 wines, diverge a little bit, and you can see that the Vieille Vigne has this darker fruit and this more age-worthy character. The Cuvée Classique, I think, is often overlooked, but it's so approachable in a young, in an early drinking time frame. I think in our minds, we have the idea of Clos Vougeot as something which ages glacially, and, you really have to give it 20, 30 years in the cellar. This is no longer the case, and people are making wines which are far more accessible, far younger. And I just wanted to say a few words about the Homage Cuvée as well, because it is something that hasn't been made in 23, but I don't see that as a bad thing at all. And it's not the fact that it was qualitatively not good enough. I think they're looking for it to be distinctive. So I think, if it doesn't really have a very different personality from the Vieille Vigne, for example, as it didn't, Francois felt in 23, then it's more honest to blend it back into the VV, and it increases the quality of the VV cuvee as well. I think what they're really looking for is a very different, very unique expression from the Homage cuvee and the years that they make it. And it's made from just the first buds on each of the vines, on each of the canes. So it's just the bunches of grapes which are closest to the center of the vine, which get the best of the nutrients, if you like. But in a vintage like 23, there was such wonderful sort of natural abundance. I wonder, we didn't go into detail with him with it, but I wonder if it was sort of unnecessary to have that sort of that natural concentrating effect.
Yeah, I think it's in my notes. We didn't really go into it. I've just got a scribble here that says, "Not sure if we'll make Homage this year. They can feel the concentration in the wine, but there's appreciable restraint also in the structure," which just means that they thought it was exactly the same as the VV. It's straight into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to kind of a sort of more fundamental question about the Domaine, really, which is like, what are they all about? And for me, they're Clos Vougeot experts, aren't they? They're people that look at. I mean, they're blessed with obviously a great holding, the largest holding on the vineyard. But what this allows them to do is to take a really kind of granular approach to this amazing Grand Cru, and they've found uniqueness across their holdings, and they want to express that. And where they don't find uniqueness for Homage specifically, they don't make it in that year, and it's kind of as simple as that.
And to paint a sort of fuller picture on that expertise of Vougeot, which I think is such a brilliant point you've raised, they are only one of two estates, domains, where they are in Clos Vougeot. Their vines are there, the winery is there, they're making the wine, the building is all in Vougeot. So it's that really is one of the big pluses, I think, when you think about Château Latour and Vougeot itself.
Have you ever been to one of the parties that they do at the
That's the Château.
The one near? But have you been?
I have been to Musique à Vin, which is hosted there. I've not done the hip hop party yet.
I was going to say you didn't end up throwing up in the Clos Vougeot after.
That is not my style. But yeah, tempted with the hip hop one. We'll see. I could see you there with a backwards cap on, Hystericals. Pop into some grime.
EastEnders, Grant Mitchell does R&B.
I do have to say, I was very impressed with your pronunciation. I'm disappointed we didn't get a homage of Jean Marin. Before Jean,
I've touched a nerve there, clearly.
Good.
Before the tone goes even further down, I just wondered, one more thought is there a parallel to be drawn with Domaine comme Georges de Vogüé's Musigny and Château de la Tour's Clos Vougeot, in the sense that they are the majority holder of these respective vineyards. Well, in the sense of Château de la Tour, they own 11% of the appellation. And for anybody who's driven past Clos Vougeot on that road will know, it's an enormous vineyard. So 11% is an extensive holding of vines. And they are perhaps, in their respective ways, the only domains that are able to give an overview of those vineyards. Lots of people produce very high quality Musigny, and some people produce very high quality Clos Vougeot. But to have this overview of the appellation, I think, is quite special and quite unique.
Yeah, it is. It is something that they share for sure. I mean, is there anybody, I'm racking my brain now, that splits Clos Vougeot into multiple cuvées? Is it only Château de la Tour that are making multiple cuvées? I mean, I'd have to double check.
There's cuvée names, but that's, I think, all their holdings going into it. Yeah, I don't think there's any that I can think off the top of my head.
So that's quite unique in that respect.
Good point.
Absolutely. I guess I sort of watch this space one with Château de la Tour, Edouard and I. Have you tasted the whites that he makes? He does one barrel, with the Pinot Barrel.
Yeah.
And I know Edouard would like to sort of get it commercially out there, and it's one barrel, so we're talking 300 bottles here. So on that front, if it does come out, it'll be very small quantities. But I'm excited. I tried the 23 as well, and it's quite aromatic. And white Vougeot, most people are aware that Domaine de Vougeray does one, and outside of that, it's quite rare to find. But that's a sort of a watch this space one. And then sort of, I guess, bringing it back to the people, because this is what it's all about. I think they've got a great, first of all, Francois, he's the president of the BIVB, since 2015, and, the Van der Bourgogne board, so that sort of helps keep all the appellation control in play. And with Edouard coming in and really sort of imparting, what he wants to do with the Domaine forward, like we said, with the way that they taste now, the way that they're exploring different vessel sizes, is certainly indicative that he's going to be around for a long time. I mean, Edouard, I'm very fond of, and my first encounter with him is actually I smuggled him into Annabelle's when he was 14 years of age. So I've known him sort of 15 years now. Along with Francois, his dad was there. We were doing a dinner in there, and he was over, and we sort of topped him up with some martinis in the corner, and I think it was quite a fuzzy evening for him. But we've jested about it, and quite recently, because my last sort of evening out with Edouard was going from Annabelle's, the glitz and glamour of Mayfair, to the Ali Pali for the World Darts Championship, where at the previous Burgundy tasting, so last year, January 24, we were having dinner afterwards, and Edouard turned around and said he's got a bucket list of things like we all have, and one of them high up there was, I'd love to go to the Ali Pali to watch the darts. So I was, we made a little pact, made it happen, and myself, Mr. Hargrove, and Max from the team as well. We had a very fun evening chanting and watching darts.
I believe you were sporting a roasted turkey hat.
Oh, indeed, yeah. We had roasted turkey. I think Edouard was, from memory, a very merry elf with some ears and a Christmas pudding perhaps on his head.
Yeah. And nicely, there were a couple of comments from other winemakers saying, why wasn't I invited to this? It may grow in years to come.
This is brilliant. This is very true. They were envious, without saying any names at all, other Vigneron of serious renown who want to become involved. So, yeah, watch this space there as well. Let's finish on one thing, drinking and when to drink the wines, and what's drinking now. With Château de la Tour, I think that whole bunch character in certain vintages allows you to open, similar to other domains we work with of great standing who have whole bunch within high up on their list of the method with vinification. In those great vintages and great Pinot, we've spoken about it so many times. You can pull the corks 2 or 3 years where you've got that sweetness of the fruit coming through, aromatic lift, and great wines can be drunk early and then later on. And I think this applies to this. I think Cuvée Classique, you Mr. Eccles, you sort of nailed it on the head. That sort of elegance and finesse side with the younger vines allows, certainly for after 2-3 years, for you to jump in and see what the wine's like. They will age for 20-30 years quite comfortably. But the VV I love almost with 5 years on it. I love exploring those wines, young, early doors more than any. And I think a 2017, which a few of us had a lunch before Christmas, blind against other 17s from Côte de Nuit, including neighbouring parcels from Musigny and Grand Château. It was actually a few people's favourite on the day, wasn't it?
It's worth remembering, for those who know the wines of Sylvain Pataille, that he is in fact the consultant winemaker at Château de la Tour as well. And so that sort of approachability that Sylvain's wines have, they can almost be drunk upon arrival in the UK. I think there must be some influence and some transfer from that style of winemaking.
Yeah, legend. Totally. Whole bunch master.
Completely. I think tasting that, it was Clos Vougeot Vervine 2017 in December. That was absolutely excellent, and also we had like some quite spicy food that day, and it just complemented it quite well. It was really good, and a lot of disbelieving eyes when sort of one of the wines from Vosne Romanée was revealed and wasn't what they'd thought.
Yeah, a shout out on that note to a Coco, a restaurant in London that's sort of West African influenced fine dining. We're fond of it there. It's a brilliant place, and they do a tasting menu for incredibly reasonable sum, and is very accomplished cooking.
Certainly is.
Yeah. So yeah.
One final thing to mention as well is the sister estate of Château de la Tour, Domaine Pierre l'Abbé, which we offered separately as part of the main Burgundy release this year. But we have also included a reference to the wines in the Château de la Tour offer. So do have a look at that. There is still some availability there, and we love those wines. I mean, it's a mix of red and white, centered on Beaune, but including a Gevrey Village, including a Savigny Premier Cru, and other bits and pieces. So really good wines to look out for too.
Brilliant. Cool. Well, look, wonderful. Sorry, I mean, and it's a sort of a double header, so a bit of an extended episode. But hopefully, you have enjoyed. And we'll be back, I think, behind Comme Georges de Vaugre, maybe the next one, 23. Very exciting. Those wines they're into a real upward trajectory, as we know we've spoken about. Got some very impressive scores as well, so I think people will be interested to hear that one. But yeah, so goodbye from me.
And me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Lovely.